Alright YouTube, it's time for the Occult video 117 on Doomsday, the End Times, Apocalypse, Ragnarok. I've already made a video specifically on the topic of Ragnarok as it overlaps with the idea of symbolism. That is that Ragnarok is a stand-in for simply, you could call it a term for where a cycle which is discrete or semi-discrete ends and the same or a different cycle of similar type begins. We could look at it as a stand-in for the Ice Age as well, of course, rather close to what one could consider an end time for certain cultures around the world. Things would be vastly different if they cooled down a few degrees worldwide. I think people need to keep that in perspective when they think about climate change, perhaps. As far as Doomsday as the total end, that is, an end times comes, Jesus comes back, defeats Antichrist, Satan, whatever, and everyone ends up either in this big golden cube city on a massively high peak, which is about as long, wide, and oddly enough tall as the nation of Brazil, while everyone else sort of burns forever or ends up outside of this city. It's not entirely clear. I do not believe in any specific religious conception of such an end time. But I do believe there will be an end to man in one of two forms. Here's where it gets interesting. At some point in the future, man will do one of two things. He will either have changed so much in both behavior and technology as well as potentially appearance that it will no longer be the same species we would now remark upon as being Homo sapiens, or Homo sapiens sapiens. I don't know how wise we actually are, let's face it. Or we will have been wiped out. And either of these can happen. The transhumanists argue that we should become immortal. Technically possible, in a biological sense. If we do achieve that, and we achieve enough technology, it's entirely possible we could begin terraforming other planets and or inhabiting other planets that are already potentially habitable. We could spread out, scatter among the stars, so to speak, and become an interstellar species. It is possible that we could do that. It's not even unlikely that it will happen. In fact, I hold that this, if we don't knock ourselves back to the Stone Age first, is probably the most possible outcome. I would argue that unless some other intelligent species intervenes, keeping our technology back, enslaving us, or killing us all, or something like that, yes, we will eventually achieve that. However, the other possibility remains. We could get knocked back significantly in technology at any given time on this planet. We are vulnerable. We are fairly fragile species on such a dynamic world. The universe is a violent place. There are asteroids whipping around. There are comets whizzing around. There may be space plagues. They may actually exist. We could have a sort of miasma around this world that keeps other species specifically from bothering to visit us. I've discussed this. The Earth, because of pollen, dust, space junk, and things of that nature, might have a death shroud around it right now that actually, oddly enough, protects us, even as it's a sign of our own planet's contamination with all of these reproductive spores and viruses and so forth. It may be too dangerous for any foreign species to land here, in which case, why would they bother coming here at all? It's not like they can do much with this planet. They may even be afraid of residual contamination from this planet. An asteroid hits and a plume of ash goes up outside of, escapes our gravity, and begins contaminating the moon, begins contaminating Mars and Venus and so forth. They may be terrified to get anywhere near this star system. In fact, one thing you could say, one answer to the query of why don't we see life out there, perhaps it avoids this region of space specifically because there's already life here, and they realize the possibility of contamination actually outweighs any benefit from extracting resources from this general region of space. It could have gone a very long distance in the vacuum of space by this point, since life has been around here for a very, very long time in that form. Viruses, bacteria, certain tardigrades and so forth. Finally remembered what they were called in my last video dealing with space. I had a brain fart. I couldn't remember what they're called. So those little wriggly, microscopic, little grub-looking things, almost rather strange little beings. But we will either be wiped out or we will change form. If we persist, we will continue to evolve. If we become an interstellar species where we're spending a lot of time in space, we've manipulated ourselves, probably genetically, manipulated our surroundings. The way in which we evolve over time will be vastly different. And this in turn can take several forms. It may be natural selection. It may be that we just, over time, because we become long-lived, we continue reproducing sexually, and we end up in a totally different form. We might be far taller. We might have a different skin color. We might be blue. We might look like elves. We might turn into dwarves. We might look like grays. We might look like the stereotypical classifications of various alien beings that we've ruminated about. Or we could do it deliberately. We could decide, well, we don't need sexual selection anymore. We can genetically modify ourselves, clone ourselves. We now know how to do this properly. If we need more manpower, we do a round of cloning. If not, we don't reproduce. We have sex only for pleasure, or we don't even have it at all. Maybe we determine that something else is more fun. Maybe we inject ourselves with some sort of amphetamine, space amphetamine. We're mining asteroids for methamphetamine crystals or something. That becomes our primary motive in the universe. That could happen. But if we don't achieve this fairly soon, there's a pretty good chance over the next 1,000 years or so we get wiped out. Or at the very least, we get knocked back in technology so far that we end up back at the dawn of the industrial age. The only advantage the next time around, if we survive such a cataclysm, is that a great deal of knowledge will still be there. Electronic form would probably be all degraded and fucked up. But books, literally, as a repository of human knowledge, you can't get better than that. Properly stored, properly kept away from degrading elements, from the sunlight, from rot, and so forth. We might think of creating books out of substances that are better than pulp paper. Even the old hemp paper they used in the 1800s lasts a hell of a lot longer. Old fine wax paper from the Renaissance still looks like the day it was produced, as opposed to pulp that after 50 years it looks pretty bad, generally speaking, starts to degrade pretty easily. We could think about all these things. My recommendation for mankind, either way, is to build up repositories of knowledge. Now, we see they're doing this already with genetic variation. You look at these seed storage vaults they're drilling into the Arctic and other places. Very good idea, because after a cataclysm, that may be the only repository of certain species that exists. Something that could be used, something that at the very least, studied by science, could be used as a baseline for genetic research, even if it has no further purpose, really, on this planet. Storing books, storing other important goods. Even, I would say, this would probably be a great idea, storing the means of electrical production, storing solar panels and windmills and so forth that can be quickly assembled after a catastrophe. If we get hit by an asteroid tomorrow, most of those energy-generating structures we have on or near the surface of the world would be gone. If it was large enough, they'd be wiped out. But if you have enough bunkers full of crates after crates of storage, of solar panels, of batteries, of windmills, and so forth in their non-assembled form, then the remnant, the nucleus of mankind that survives, would very quickly be able to reestablish electricity. With the proper equipment stored, they could quickly reestablish worldwide communication. With the right storage, even a nuclear war is survivable, to a degree. I've already said that the melting down of hundreds of nuclear plants during a nuclear war, due to a lack of maintenance or because they're damaged by nuclear weapons because they happen to be close enough to a target, would probably render the surface of the Earth more or less uninhabitable for at least some years. It would be extremely difficult for mankind, with any semblance of lack of genetic abnormality, significant mutations anyway, to survive. However, there are ways around this. I've thought of this before myself. What if we were to store compost? We were to store not just the seeds, but also the stratum upon which to grow things. And after the ashes, I point out, pray that it happens in winter in the northern hemisphere. That's where most of the radiation will be. The north and south don't mix as readily as some people think. Most of the nuclear explosions and meltdowns would be in the northern hemisphere if it is winter at that time. A lot of that radiation will get into the snow, and in spring when it melts off, the ground is still frozen and less permeable. Relatively little of that nuclear remnant, that actual radioactivity, will penetrate the soil. Much of it will be entrapped in the snow and the frost, it will run off into bodies of water and get carried out to the ocean. It would significantly reduce the overall radioactive toll on the land, at least. You'd still be able to farm it. If not, if it happens during a temperate part of the year, if you're in a temperate climate that's not frozen solid at the time, you'd have some problems. You could literally store, this is a way as well to store carbon, storing composted remains, manure, things of that nature, certainly fertilizer, in bunkers of one sort or another, would behoove mankind. The population would be far lower. Therefore, you would need relatively little actual electrical machinery. You'd need relatively little in the way of construction material to construct what would become settlements. You'd need relatively less stratum because you could farm it for a generation or two as the radiation level naturally decreases. You could farm within those areas. You'd need to take in fencing or material to make walls. You'd literally have a return to these small city-states. They'd be communicating, but there wouldn't be much travel between them at first. They'd need to be mostly self-sufficient. They'd need to be put in locations of low radioactive density. They'd need to be put into locations that are convenient for when they begin to expand. You wouldn't want to put one in an area where you've got just one little narrow valley and no significant room for growth without having to branch out infrastructure anyway, maintain roads and so forth. It would be an opportunity for man to actually very quickly not only build back up to the level it was at before such a war, such a calamity, asteroid strike, nuclear annihilation, whatever, but a chance to actually improve upon things. With the proper social order instilled, man could slow down its growth. It could take better advantage of the world's resources without stripping it bare. It could significantly reduce its overall impact while maximizing its efficiency. It could be more literate. It could be more efficient. There would be greener. It would certainly be cleaner and healthier. Disease would slow down as far as how quickly it spreads. And man could then take that time, especially during the good times, you don't have a famine or an epidemic or something, to actually work on trying to solve the problems of disease, immunize the whole population. A significant reduction, I will say this, a significant reduction of the world's population to a few nuclei of mankind would also allow mankind to wipe out most human diseases very efficiently. Why? Right now we have a huge world population. It's relatively difficult. We're having trouble wiping out polio. But if you only have a few 100,000 survivors and you take a few 100,000 doses of a vaccine for a disease down into your bunkers and immunize everybody, you can wipe that disease out. It'll be extinct. It'll no longer, unless it has some natural host like Ebola, it will be extinct. It would be a possibility for the medical apparatus of the world to preempt the next big disaster if it plans properly. If proper planning is put into place for before such an event, which is going to happen in the future, might happen in our lifetimes, might happen in our children's lifetimes, might happen 1,000 years from now. If we plan ahead, we can significantly reduce the impact of deleterious effects of the environment on mankind for after such a disaster. A golden age would be born. Many diseases would be a thing of the past. Pollution would be less. There'd be more greenery, more scenery. Science would already be well developed. It would just be a matter of teaching people. It'd be a matter of having a good educational structure set up. It could be a good time for humanity. Yes, it'd be a lot of bemoaning, a lot of loss of life, a lot of suffering, and a lot of boredom if you're sitting in a bunker for 6 months at a time, eating nothing more than military rations, which I'm going to get to enjoy some of myself soon. But at the same time, mankind afterwards could have a literal renaissance. It would last 1,000 years. It wouldn't be short-lived. It would be like a utopian golden age, properly constructed. There would still be social problems. Therefore, it also behooves social reformers to try to develop manifestos for such a situation that can be used to reorder society thereafter. It could lead to the rise of benevolent nationalism, where all of these populations learn to enjoy one another's differences, work together on other means, in form of trade, in form of communication, certainly, exchange of ideas and technology, so that the world can actually stretch out to the stars more efficiently. It would give us an opportunity to do things like that. Is it likely that that will happen? I don't know. Now, there's no way to tell what sort of planning has actually been put into place. We know that they're storing seeds. We know that there are bunkers that certain people and corporations and religious groups and governments have built for an atomic holocaust especially. But we don't know necessarily all that's stored down there. Hopefully, it does involve a great repository of human knowledge, copies of important scientific works and so forth. Otherwise, a great proportion of man's wisdom will be lost, and then unfortunately what would happen is mankind would again relapse back into the 1800s, maybe earlier, and have very, very little for several generations. It would take us a long time to recover from that. That's not necessarily what we need to be doing, though. I know I'm getting a little off on a tangent, but it does involve the occult. It does involve the spiritual. This is the essence of mankind. As far as doomsday goes, there will be a doomsday. Mankind will eventually end, if only at the death of the universe itself, or the galaxy itself, if we can't become intergalactic. I think jury's still out on whether it's possible to travel from galaxy to galaxy. I'm willing to admit there might be a hard cap at that point. As far as being interstellar, yeah, it's possible. It's just a matter of the will to do so, the technology required. We're getting near to it now, but is it wise to focus on that when we should be battening down the hatches and waiting for the next big disaster, actually to potentially cleanse the planet, to allow people to emerge into a golden age? I don't think that we should start a nuclear war. I don't think we should start worshipping the coming comet or anything like that. But it is a chance to significantly improve the plight of mankind. As of the world today, I can't imagine that there'd be enough cooperation or efficiency or intelligence involved with mankind, especially at the government level, let's face it, to actually accomplish such a thing. And I oppose transhumanism. I don't think we should even bother trying to become immortal. It's not necessary for what I'm talking about anyway. It's not necessary for man to be immortal. In fact, that probably raises more problems than it solves. I could have a healthy debate, I suppose, with somebody on that token. I've already spoken of it before. But there will be asteroids hitting this planet. There will be epidemics. They happen all the time. They've happened throughout human history. In fact, we're about due for another one. We're due for an extinction level event. We need to start thinking seriously about preserving ourselves beyond that. Otherwise, the lineage of man will die. Every human will be dead. There won't be a human population. Will be forgotten. Does that matter long term? No. It's going to happen anyway. Again, billions of years in the future, do you think that mankind will still exist? There's a remote possibility. Wouldn't be in anything close to the same form we're in now. We'd be totally different. Anything from today, any book written today would probably be lost by then. Probably wouldn't have been preserved for so many aeons. Everything that you've ever done, that I've ever done, even the most famous individuals will have been forgotten by then in the span of that time. So many disasters would have happened to different human populations roving through the stars or whatever, that they wouldn't exist anymore. The knowledge would be lost. They'd have new knowledge to use. That's about all. Peace out.